Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Practical Founders Podcast, where every week we hear an amazing story from a serious founder who built a valuable software company and did it without big funding. This week, my guest is Josh Turley, the CEO of RTA, the fleet management company. I've known Josh for 10 years. He's a member of my Practical Founders peer groups of CEOs of bootstrapped and lightly funded software founders who work together every month on their business. He has grown a little business into a fast-growing business with $15 million in revenues, just raised a serious growth equity round, took some money off the table. And it's an improbable and amazing story of the business. When you hear what Josh has done with the business, he has transformed and is still transforming, and himself as a CEO, you're going to really be impressed what he's created for his industry, for his team, for his family, and now for his growth equity investors. It's an amazing opportunity, and you probably haven't heard any story like this one ever before. And it's my pleasure to share Josh's story with all of you. Hey, Josh, it's good to see your smiling face this week. Welcome to the Practical Founders Podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's been nice to get on. So thank you.
Yes. Well, you're one of the success stories, one of many, chugging along and growing steadily of the practical founders and CEOs in my Practical Founders CEO peer groups. We've known each other almost 10 years, and we see each other almost every month in the peer groups and talk pretty frequently there. Let's just start with, that's a pretty wild shirt you got on here. Where are you in the world today? I know you travel a lot, but
We do travel a lot.
yeah.
But no, I'm in the office here in Phoenix, and we have Hawaiian Shirt Fridays. So today's a Friday, and a lot of the office staff is set up in Hawaiian shirts. So it's kind of a tradition we started probably about 4 months ago.
Okay.
My VP of marketing bought everybody Hawaiian shirts and said, let's do this. So we did it.
Okay, that's great.
It
Well, I was
started an
in Phoenix
addiction,
for a
though.
long time. What's that?
It started an addiction, though, because now, everybody's kind of competing and who's got the freshest threads. And
Okay.
I'm a big fan of Sunday Swagger, a little product placement there, but it's a lot of fun. So,
Well, I know I have a lot of friends in Phoenix. I lived there for 23 years, and I hear it's been a very nice springtime, relatively speaking. Has the heat hit you guys
not
yet?
yet. It's waiting. It's
Okay.
supposedly coming this week or next week, but it's been a very, very slow start to summer. So
Awesome. Well,
we're okay
great.
with that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. It's a very practical summer so far.
That's right.
Steady and chugging along here. Well, Josh, you've had some exciting announcements recently this year, and you've been growing this business steadily for almost 10 years. Why don't we just start off with what is the company that you are CEO of, and about how big is it and where is it now in the world?
Yeah. So we're RTA. We call ourselves RTA, the Fleet Success Company. That stands for Ron Turley Associates. And we focus on selling fleet management software to governments, municipalities, things of that nature, to help them track all of their maintenance, repairs, asset lifecycle, the whole kit and caboodle from acquisition to disposition.
So this is your city has those trucks and
Yep.
those police cars and those vans and with the logos on the side of them. Somebody's in charge of making sure that they're accounted for, fueled up, maintained,
that they're
permitted,
safe. Yeah.
safe, and everything else. And is that the size of it there?
That is the size of it. So
Wow. Fleet management sounds very sexy.
one of those super sexy niches that everybody wants to jump into. And yeah.
Well, I know there's some VC-funded competitors in your category as well. I mean, it's
Yeah.
kind of a universal thing. No matter where you are in the world, there's organizations, companies, but you focus on the government side of things mostly.
Yeah.
Is that all government or mostly government?
For our portfolio, it's mostly government. That's
Yeah.
not something that we've gotten focused on that probably in the last 2 years or so. Just as we've grown and matured, something
Yeah.
we've had to learn.
What do you
And
mean? Focus to grow?
yeah, that's
Josh?
weird. I know that's unheard of, especially on this podcast.
Yes, that's right.
But yeah, so we do a mix of it. And our customers, we've got trucking customers, we have construction, agriculture. There's K-12, so schools are included in that.
Yeah.
But yeah, a lot of publicly funded institutions. So
Well, a lot of companies use asset management software for
Mhm.
their computers, their tech, or, those kind of things. Is this a bigger version of an asset management with, let's say, fleet, auto, truck, et cetera, specific features, fueling and safety and things like that?
Yeah, I'd probably say it's not bigger, it's narrow. So it's
Oh,
more
okay.
focused on fleet. You'll see people try to use an EAM or like an SAP or an Oracle,
Ah,
something that's built for more traditional enterprise asset management.
mm,
And they're just not focused enough on the subject itself. And so you end up with something that's a little compromised, doesn't quite go as far as it needs to, doesn't go as deep as it needs to. And so
yeah.
we try to compete against those guys and rip them out whenever we can.
Okay. Well, the classic vertical market focus game.
That's
And
right.
you mentioned enterprise, are your customers very large, the city of New York or those kind of things? Or are they very small or,
We've
across
kind
the
of run the
board?
gamut. Yeah.
Okay.
So, I'd say our smallest customer ideally has at least 250 assets that they're tracking. So
Okay.
you think about just in a city, it's a total mix of the fleet type, but 250 vehicles that they might be tracking. So small towns might fit into this, but little, one light towns would not, right? But we'll go all
Yeah.
the way up. I think our largest customer has something like 25,000 assets. And so
Wow.
it's quite large. It'd be larger than probably the biggest cities that you have. New York might be one of the largest cities, but we've
Mm,
recently started getting into state contracts. And so you
okay.
think about all the different state agencies that have vehicles that are on the road, that are moving. Those are great customers for us. So,
Okay. Well, that's a pretty big market. There's a lot going on with
yeah,
that. We're hearing a lot about government spending, and this is one of the things that we don't want them to stop spending money on. So
that's
they,
right.
the fire trucks
We
and
don't want to doge
police
this one.
cars and everything
Yeah.
to keep working. Yeah.
Well, we have a saying is that without us, they walk, right? So we definitely need to keep those on the road.
I'm sure you've got a lot of sayings being deep into this industry, as well. So how big is the company now? How many employees, revenues, generally customers?
Yeah. So employees, I believe we just hired employee 92. So
Okay.
we're growing pretty rapidly. I know we've got about 9 or 10 positions open right now.
Wow.
So we could be cracking the century mark here pretty soon. You mentioned like we've been around since 1979, and so some of that growth has been interesting. But just in the
We'll
last
t
few
we'll
years, yeah,
catch
we'll
up with
talk
that
about that
story. I think you
for
kind of
sure.
win the award. You dropped the mic for the oldest, software company. On your website, I was poking around today, see what was new, and there's showing some of the team members. You guys are some
Yeah.
people are old timers in this industry, over 350 years experience in
Yep.
fleet management. That's I'll probably also rang the bell for the most total experience out there.
Yeah. So, but just over those years, we, from a client perspective, we're about 1,100 clients total,
Yeah.
and 70-80% of that is in the government space. So,
Okay. And I know you've done something that old has probably transformed a few times from different software systems to more modern ones. And you are mostly over the hump of converting your on premise older technologies, your legacy, probably you call it, to the modern cloud technologies and have transition points in between for your customers there. But what percentage of your customers are on your modern cloud stack?
right now, I'd say we're measuring at about 50-50.
Okay.
So, from a daily active users, we look at that pretty religiously as we're trying to get people moved over to the new platform. How well
Right.
are we doing in that progression and adoption? And
Right.
we're seeing that just steadily chip away, and hitting that 50-50 mark just recently. So,
Well, if you're old enough, you've been through these kind of transformations and legacy and new code and all of that, and they never go as fast as you want them to go. And a lot of your customers would just hang on for death, to the old system there. And I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing. You can choose how you treat that, but it's really amazing. So you recently raised some growth equity funding.
mhm,
So you've been effectively a bootstrap business for all of these years, right?
all of these
All
years,
these
yeah,
years. And, you took over in 2016. And you've been growing it and transforming it in a whole new way. But you took on some growth equity funding recently. What can you say about that before we go into the details?
yeah. It's been a journey. It's definitely interesting to go from being a bootstrap founder. In
Okay.
our case, I don't know if I'm gonna again drop the mic already, but being a third generation family owned business,
Yeah.
like bootstrapping was
Yeah.
just part of our identity and having that
Yeah.
autonomy.
Yeah.
To now bring on a partner who is going to help us get to that next level, and maybe we could have gotten there on our own, but it probably would have taken us a lot longer. And so just
Yeah.
somebody that can help put a little fuel in the tank and, make sure that we're doing well and being good stewards of that. So,
And who is the partner? And who's your partner on that team, and how much did you raise?
yeah, so we did the deal with the Susquehanna Growth Equity. So they're a growth equity firm that invests off their own balance sheet. So they're a little unique in this space is that they're evergreen, which was one of the biggest things that we liked about their structure. And I've worked with, the three people I've primarily worked with over there is Aaron Flack, Ben Weinberg, and Sri Parakam. So,
Great. Yeah, and that's pretty new. When did that officially close?
yeah, so we closed in April, April 3rd officially. And then I want
Okay.
to say we announced a few weeks later. So, it ended up being, I think you asked this was, the size of the round, it ended up being about a $26 million round. So,
Okay, and, in a growth equity round for bootstrap founders who don't have to raise, this isn't about VC-funded style rocket fuel to go really fast. Most of that was secondary, as you've said on stage with me a couple times there. So you took some money, off the table and de-risked a little
yeah.
bit or a
And
lot.
so there was a decent amount of it. And that was kind of one of the big motivations was to help just de-risk a little bit.
Yeah.
As a founder, you tie up a lot into a business and there's always something threatening to try to take it away from you.
Yeah.
And you get to a point, you're like, all right, how long do you want to keep going with this
Yeah.
before you just take something off the table? And so, yeah, it was a nice opportunity to take a few of the chips off the table without totally divesting ourselves. Like we still retain a significant majority of the company
Yeah.
and, we're still in growth mode, right? Like we still have work to do, which was motivating for me.
Right. And apparently motivating for Susquehanna growth, right? They bought
Absolutely.
into your vision of transforming this, old business, into a modern, powerhouse, and it's already moving, and you've got a lot of proof around that. But you're halfway across the bridge with your customers and on premise, and building up your business.
Yeah. And I think they saw that as well. We when we first started the process, we were probably about 12 million, maybe just over that in ARR. And just since we've closed, like we just crossed 15 million
My
this month.
gosh,
So it's
yeah.
moving.
I was with you on stage last month at SaaS Doc, and you shared your story with the SaaS conference there, and you were saying 14 million, and now the run rate's even bigger here.
Yep.
So it's a month later. That's really amazing. Well, you've been a member of my Practical Founder peer groups since I started them 3 years ago, and I've watched you grow the business and get through the challenges and help other founders and grow. But you weren't starting thinking about raising funding like this growth equity type funding or selling the company.
No.
So any earlier here, that precipitated pretty quickly. And you said, hey, this is interesting. What changed your mind about it? It wasn't on your top of your list. And then it pretty quickly became top of list.
Yeah, I'm a big believer that equity is the most expensive form of capital. And so
Yeah.
anytime you can avoid selling equity, you should, right? And there's many other options to go out and secure capital. I'm a big fan of debt financing. I think it's awesome
Yeah. Which you've
that
done a
we
few
did
times.
that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But yeah, when somebody, puts out a term sheet and they start talking to you about some numbers and you start imagining like, oh, like this is different. This is, it's real. It was significant, and as as I talked to my wife, that was honestly probably the biggest thing, right? Is maybe me and I'm like, oh, whatever, let's keep going, right? And I believe in myself. And she's like, well, I don't know, let's think about
Yeah.
this.
That's pretty
And
interesting.
then I
It's
talked
interesting
to,
numbers
yeah, those are interesting
already.
numbers. Those aren't like, oh, whatever, small numbers. Those are decent size. It almost feels like you're being stupid to walk away from those numbers, right?
Well, we'll talk about that. It's a really, really interesting thing. And growth equity folks know this. You say, "No, I'm not raising money. No, I'm not raising money," and they slide something interesting across the table after learning enough about your business, and
It's
then
almost
you
like
say,
they have
"Well,
a
that's
playbook for
interesting."
this, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Those preemptives and so forth. And I know you went through a process and
Yep.
had your fun with due diligence. And did you have your first board meeting?
Yeah, we just had our first board meeting just under a month ago. So yeah, in May.
Okay. And, is all well here? Did it go as planned? I'm
It
sure there was
did. It
some
was
learning on
actually
both sides, the first meeting?
if I learned anything, it's not to schedule a board meeting the week that the entire executive team is traveling. Just from a preparation standpoint, I definitely put a massive burden on my team to get ready for that meeting. But they crushed it. They absolutely nailed their presentation. Succeeded with flying colors. And
Yeah.
as you're fond of saying, usually that first meeting, they were expecting an oh shit moment,
Yeah.
and there never was one. And so they
Oh,
were super
good.
happy with that, and I was
No
happy with
shit.
that.
Yeah, right.
So,
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah, and you did a lot of work to make sure everybody was aligned and
oh
learn the
yeah,
things where you had to bend a little bit on both sides, and we'll talk about that one too. So, it's a really an amazing story, this unsexy space, and you transformed a business that was a family business and it is every year turning into a bigger powerhouse, but you didn't choose the big VC funding route and, didn't get too far ahead of yourself there. We'll talk about your amazing adventure. And now you have some money in the bank. I
yeah.
presume you did okay through the years here, but, does that feel a little different yet?
I think it's still settling in.
Yeah.
It's nice to know it's like a security blanket. You've got this
Okay.
blanket on, but no, nothing's really changed for us personally. It wasn't like you woke up and you're like, oh yeah, look at this. So I'd say it's still settling in, and I'd say that probably is true for most founders who've
Yeah. Yeah.
ever taken some secondary, but nothing changed overnight. We didn't suddenly become different people and spending lavishly on different things or whatnot. I think we're trying to be as pragmatic as possible about how do we protect this. Because it costs a lot. You think about it.
Yeah.
The amount of equity you give up, any kind of future valuation.
Yeah.
Equity is the most expensive form of capital again. So how do
Right.
we protect that and make sure it was worth it? So
Yeah, if you take 26 million raised, and if you imagine growing at you know, a 30-40% rate or, the average for these kind of companies,
yeah,
and that's doubling every 2 years, a little bit more. And so in 5 or 6 years, that's like a 5x or something like that. So that's a pretty big number,
yeah.
that your
But essentially,
partners
I
are
forego.
interested in.
Now they're going to get
Yeah.
that right
Yeah.
instead of that money. Yeah,
Yes. And we'll talk about, what benefits you get from having partners who are there to help and as well. So, yeah, this is a well-worn path for the growth equity minority style phase of life for some practical founders that are growing businesses past 10 million and want to head towards 20 and 30 and beyond. Not everybody does that. And most of the founders in my practical founders peer groups aren't heading that direction, but you had already set sails for that destination and we're headed there. So that's really exciting.
yeah.
Uh, Josh, you've mentioned this is a 35-year-old company, and it was named
45. Yeah,
after what's that? 45.
45. Yeah,
Holy cow! I'm not
it's older than
capable of
I
even
am.
doing the math, right? And your RTA, Ron Turley and Associates, that's your grandfather who started this. Let's go
Yeah.
back here. You didn't found this company, and you took over about 10 years ago, but tell us about the early decades of this business.
Yeah. So my grandfather, he used to run the entire, I guess, management of UPS's fleet. That's how
Yes.
he got started. Back then Brown was a little bit smaller than they are today. They probably
Yep.
had about 50,000 trucks, but
Mm.
his job was to make them more efficient. And so he did a whole lot of time studies and just shop management, Lean Six Sigma before that was really a big thing,
Yep.
and ended up where they were able to nearly double the size of their fleet without hiring another single technician, which in
Wow.
our world is a massive achievement, right?
Right.
Because there's usually things we call it like your technician to vehicle ratio. And as you get more vehicles, you usually have to hire more labor. And that's your most expensive resource.
Ah.
So he saves them all this money just through making their processes more efficient, getting better tooling. They did time studies to figure all this stuff out. Did the math, and I think he saved them something like $100 million. So he goes through and he does that, gets out of UPS, and everybody starts calling him up. Turley, come help me do what you did over there at UPS. Show me what you did. Teach me the ways, right? So he starts consulting, and that's really how we got started was as a consulting company in 1979. From there, he starts doing seminars, writes a few books on the best practices of fleet management, and somebody gives him the bright idea. Hey, you should take some of these reports that you have, and then they were like IRS reports. Oh, fill this
Mhm.
in, take this number, put it on line 36, subtract 52, whatever. You should hire some computer programmers and put that into a computer program. So he hired a bunch of COBOL devs
Oh my god.
and started writing a computer program, old green screen mainframe, ran
Yeah.
on Unix and DOS. And that was how he got started. I think the first edition of the software shipped in 1982.
Mm.
And so my dad joined the company right about then. He was a software engineer, went to ASU, in COBOL. And so that's what they did. It was a COBOL app for many, many years, still is actually. But they went for about 3 years. Grandpa gets out of it and just says, I'm tired of these developers. The developers are all prima donnas. He had a developer that was selling code
Even
to a
back then.
customer. Even back then, it never stopped. It's the dawn of the dinosaurs. But so he has a developer who's doing this stuff on the side, and they fired everybody. Grandpa lived right next door to my dad. And so they literally took it out of grandpa's garage and moved it into dad's garage. And dad started over. He refounded the company in 1985. So yeah, that was kind of how we got started. Those were our roots. It started in a garage and on the road as he was doing consulting.
And you grew up with this and where did you grow up? In a part of
Phoenix.
Phoenix there?
Yeah. So it was North Phoenix, about 7th Ave, right there, like, where the 101 is now, 101 and 7th Ave.
Okay, right. Yeah.
In fact, poetically, dad's actually buried right across the street from that. So
Yeah.
it's kind of an
'Cause
interesting
you're a
turn.
West Sider now.
Totally. Yeah. We're definitely
right.
through and through West Sider. We've never been on the East side, Northwest Valley. So
You don't cross over there. So you grew up with this business just being part of your family, really?
yeah, as far as like, the entrepreneurial experience, being a kid of an entrepreneur, you kind of get used to that. Is that dad's
Mhm.
always working or he's, working on computers, working on software. I had no idea what we
Ah,
did, just that he worked with computers, right? And that he was a programmer. And so it was interesting to me is like growing up as a kid, I think I always had this tinge of jealousy or shame that dad didn't work at Microsoft. For some reason, I thought he worked at Microsoft. And the day I found out that he didn't was like just my balloon got popped. Um, so we were talking through that and, I start learning a little bit more what he did. And I used to come and clean the office as a,
yeah,
young
yeah.
15, 16-year-old, just like building chairs, doing grunt work and all that. So I wasn't really involved in the business until I had turned about 19. And that's when I had just been working at Office Max and, had a major life change. And so I was like, hey, I'm ready for something different. And at Office Max, they'd give me a raise. It was something like, I was making $8.30 and they gave me a
Yeah,
7-cent raise. And I said,
yeah.
this is not going to work. So I called him dad and I was like, hey, I heard you needed some help. Do you think that's something I could do? And so they threw me in as entry level gets, answering
Yeah,
phones. I was making $10 an hour, which I was over the moon just to be able to, make that much money. I thought I was living like a king. Only to find out I was a super bargain hire and I was
yeah, of
probably
course.
making half of what the next guy was
Yeah, the
making, which is
family
fun.
insider,
Totally the
pricing
family
discount.
discount, right? This
Yeah.
19-year-old kid with no college experience.
So was that really your first, let's say, serious full-time job kind of
Totally.
thing? Yeah.
Yeah.
And you did odd jobs and, did you keep going for,
Yeah,
a
so I mean,
while?
actually,
Yeah.
my first full time gig was working the customer success line, and so that
Yeah.
was I guess customer service line.
Yeah.
So that's where I cut my teeth. Just coming in straight off the street with learning how to answer questions and handle support calls. And I stayed there. I probably did that for about 4 years. So
Yeah. And was this, I mean, this wasn't a cool business. It was kind of one of those family businesses, right?
very
You
much,
know, and
yeah,
was it, did you go to the office, but, everybody was friends of and family in the building, that kind of thing?
yeah, not too much family, thankfully,
Okay.
but definitely a very friendly atmosphere. Everybody was pretty friendly with each other.
Yeah.
The only difference was I'm this young 19-year-old kid, and I think the average age at the time was maybe 35 or 40.
Mhm.
So it wasn't my crowd, but
Mhm.
very much a, family atmosphere. Dad was huge on loyalty, loved
Mhm.
everybody. And so the team, I think I was the youngest tenured employee for about 10 years. Like it took me 10 years to get, tenure, so to speak.
Just hanging around there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how big did it get, when you started, thinking about, taking it over? There's a situation there, but, like, how
Yeah.
big
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
it just before that?
And we'll talk, a couple things that happened along the way. So, dad actually had an offer to sell the company at one
Yeah.
point. One of these big PE backed firms, that
Yeah.
basically goes out and just absorbs other companies. I think he added like something, it was close to like a $2 million offer back in 2006. And he
Mm.
was really close to taking it. Some things happened. He didn't feel good about it. So he ends up walking away from that deal. But about that time, he and I started talking and it was like, hey, what do you think about the future of this? And I was like, I've been here 2, 3 years. I don't know. I want to go back to college, get my degree because I dropped out at that time.
Mhm.
And, so we just kind of had some very light, high level discussions about it over the years.
Mm.
And then We get to kind of 2014. We've been growing, but we've been having issues.
Is this like a
Dad,
million or $2 million business or something like
maybe.
that? 3 million?
Yeah, by the time 2014 rolled around, we had just probably hit 2 million in recurring revenue.
Yeah.
But it wasn't a SaaS business. It was still very much like we were selling perpetual license. We had just started, offering hosted services. So, almost like we're the
Mhm.
MSP for the
Yep.
software. And that was just getting underway. But yeah, not really thinking about it like a SaaS business, not a high growth business. We had competitors that started after us and were absolutely cleaning our clock in the
Yeah.
space. We had thankfully made the transition from green screen to at least a Windows based application, but there was no web app, there was no mobile app. And this is
Yeah.
2014, so
Yeah.
this is not like we've already gone through the Web 2.0 transition and we're now behind the eight ball.
Mhm.
So the business was not doing great, but dad had a philosophy, which is we're never going to get rich. We're just going to be comfortable. And as long as we did better than we did last year, then we're doing fine. But he also hated paying taxes. So any kind of like profits that we would generate, he would go find something to buy or,
Oh my
purchase,
gosh.
and not like an investment, like just something that, oh, I think I want that or I need that. And he would go buy it. Like, so he'd go buy himself a truck or he'd, spend a crazy laptop or something like that. We never were on a budget. We never had anything as rigid as that. Nothing to control the spend or anything. So yeah. It was definitely a lifestyle type company for a
Yeah,
long
right.
time, and you can see that in the growth rate and just how we approached business decisions.
Yeah, right.
Um, one of the
So
big
what happened that you ended up being the CEO of this company?
Yeah, so 2014 comes around, I guess the end of 2013, dad ends up getting diagnosed with leukemia of all things, and within about 3 months, we didn't really have time to kind of plan any kind of transition or succession, but in his mind, I was always going to take over, he just didn't know when.
Mm.
So he ends up passing away in February of 2014, and literally on his deathbed, he's talking to my stepmother at the time and says, she's like, "How will I know he's ready?" And he's like, "I don't know. Just at some point, like it's going to be Josh's, and I want you to be ready for that." And so she steps into this role as a chief exec. She's a CEO, but she calls herself the cheerleader for everyone in office, right? Because for her credit, like she's not been brought up in the business, she's not run this
Yeah.
thing, interacting with the customers.
Yeah, it's
She's
just an
done,
old family business
yeah,
tradition.
exactly.
Yeah.
You know, and so we ended up kind of in this weird three-headed management monster between myself, the COO at the time, and mom as a CEO. Where here I am coming in, I've just graduated, I've got my master's degree from ASU, and like I want to make changes. There's things I know that we need to do to stay relevant and to keep going, but for somebody who's more risk averse, like our COO and mom, it was like, well, let's not change too much or let's not do this. And so it was kind of an interesting
Yeah, I'm sure.
push and pull that we ended up in about that time.
And was it dramatic or was just, it was a disagreement?
I would say dysfunctional is probably the better way to say that. It's family, right? Family is always dysfunctional.
Yeah, okay. So how did that pan out? How did you get over that?
Well, eventually, I'd say within about a year and a half, I at least convinced us to get on a budget, and then all of a sudden, we were in the cash. We
Yeah,
had targets we were aiming towards. We had expense
magic.
controls, and suddenly, like, oh, we have profits. And shortly, I would say probably about halfway through that year is when mom said, "Hey, I think you're ready to lead the company," and so she promoted me to CEO. And that's when I started making some of the changes. But I like to say I was CEO and I had kind of like pink fuzzy handcuffs on, right? Because she was
Yes,
still the
right.
owner and
Yeah,
I still had to, she's still risk averse. And so I still had to make sure that I wasn't taking too big a risk or too big a gambles. So that was an interesting era. But
yeah,
we focused on being profitable, trying to make some key hires, but just kind of going slow still with some of the changes. And it's got to be hard for her, but it was hard for me is because as you're making these changes, you have employees that have been at the company probably twice as long as I have,
of course.
or at least saw me growing up, right? And definitely
Yeah,
saw me like when I was there as a 19-year-old kid, who now this kid's the CEO and he's making these changes and he's trying to, he's a shaker and a mover and he's doing things. And you look at that and you say, wait a minute, why am I listening to this kid, right? And why isn't, your dad never would have done that. And I hated hearing that. That was tough for me because it was like you're fighting a ghost.
yeah,
And
right.
you have to ask yourselves like, well, you don't know that he wouldn't have done that because he never faced this situation, and you don't know what he would have done with this new information. And so it was very interesting trying to fight that and never be able to get his approval that what we were doing is something he would approve of for the rest of the company to kind of buy off on.
Right.
So we had kind of an interesting cultural shift for a little while there
That's very
as I took over.
transitional. Like you probably couldn't just come in and start moving things around, and you're not a rash or a brash person,
No,
but
but
you
even then,
had
it was
some
slow for
vision
me.
and some
Yeah.
clarity. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've definitely never been accused of moving too fast, but it was slow for me. That was for sure.
Yeah. And how did that evolve? You own the company now. So what
Yeah.
was the final turn in that
Yeah, so
transition?
we ended up getting to about 2017, and I knew that there was changes I wanted to make. I knew that there was things that needed to happen, and I was ready. And so we went
Yeah.
out. We had an independent auditor come in, value the business. Essentially, what you'd call it wasn't a 409A, but it was something equivalent
Yeah.
to that.
Mhm.
Company wasn't big enough to do any kind of revenue multiple, so we figured out what a price for the business was based off of the EBITDA, which is interesting since I'd just been driving up the EBITDA as the CEO.
Yeah.
But it was good, so we figured out a nice little, and this is a good plan. I would say I liked this part of it was to work in like seller financing. And so if you have a family business or you have something that you're trying to figure out, how do I hand this off to my kid or do something different? What's a good transition plan to bring in maybe somebody else? Seller financing worked really nicely is that, but she still has risk as part of that. So we had to put up our house and put up other collateral to kind of help mitigate that. But we got really favorable terms, and we come up with a nice little term sheet, secured it with the stocks as well. So all of it was still tied up.
This podcast is brought to you by my friends at Fullscale. 2 years ago, I interviewed three-time software founder Matt Watson on this podcast about his successful practical founder journeys. Matt leveraged offshore software development talent in his last two SaaS companies to staff up quickly and grow efficiently. So for his fourth venture, Matt created Fullscale, one of the fastest growing software development companies in any region. Fullscale vets, employs, and supports over 300 professional software developers and testers in the Philippines who can augment and extend your core dev team. I know several practical SaaS founders who use Fullscale's dev talent to make progress on their products and do it efficiently. Visit fullscale.io to learn why their approach works so well for so many SaaS founders. Now back to our program.
I ended
So
up
you
buying it in
put up your
2017.
own money in the future profits of this business
Yep.
against this. You bought it out.
I bet
Like
on
a,
myself. Yeah. And
yeah,
that's exactly
leverage
what it
buyout,
was.
you would
Yeah.
say, right? Yeah.
Yeah. We just didn't use
Interesting.
a bank, and so that was
That's right. Yeah.
yeah.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And I don't know if
And
that was a good thing in hindsight, like it
ah,
definitely worked in our favor from an interest rate perspective, but it puts an interesting twist into any relationship. And so it creates kind of this dynamic tension. Well, how's the business doing and how's all this? And it's like, you're not really involved, but you kind of have to be involved. And so there's a little bit of judgment that comes through
yes,
there. So
right.
it's an
Yeah.
interesting dynamic.
Yeah, we don't
Um,
hear much about family transitions in software
Not in the
businesses.
SaaS world. Yeah.
Almost never.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. That's really interesting. So when did you end up as full owner and CEO of RTA?
July 15th, 2017 on the date.
O Okay, so not quite 10 years ago, but you had been playing the transition before that and starting to move the business. Did you wake up the next day and go in and say, "All right, people, here's what's gonna happen," and start
Uh,
making changes, and
Not the
it was a
next
straight
day,
line from there?
but maybe a month. I gave myself a month. I
Yeah.
immediately put some job ads out. The first thing
Mhm.
I needed to do was get myself out of the technology side. So I hired a CTO.
Ah.
Got a guy from
You were kind of
Microsoft.
hands in the product back
Oh
then, I
yeah,
guess?
yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I grew up in the product. I was doing by then. I'd moved out of customer service. I had launched the QA initiative. So I was the first QA
Yeah.
person we had. I was officially the first product manager. Dad had been filling that role,
Yeah,
so I
mhm.
guess the non-founder
Very
product
classic.
manager. And then I took over the tech support division. And so like I had done a lot of things.
Yeah.
Um, but I needed somebody else to do that piece for me. So I went out and hired a CTO for Microsoft. That was a great hire for us.
Oh, great.
I knew we needed to invest in marketing and brand because our marketing and brand was atrocious. It was terrible. It was all
Was it
like,
like a 30-year-old logo, that kind of thing?
30-year-old logo. It was like hand
Yeah.
drawn, like with MS
Yeah.
Paint kind of thing, very low tech.
Yeah.
It was rough. And
It
so
looks like, like a vertical software company of the '90s and 2000s
we
was kind
never
of
we
a
never
scrappy
graduated from the
lifestyle business,
90s.
right? Yeah.
That's what it felt like,
Yeah.
because that was who dad hired and that he never fired anybody. You had to do something really egregious to get fired. And so that was kind of where we were at. So I hired a marketing person to help us do with some brand work. We ended up hiring a new head of sales. And so I just started making some changes. One of the changes I did at least convince mom to make was we need to start hiring web designers. And so we had just barely started, I want to say the year prior, with hiring some web designers and the CFO. I at least got those two things. So, but the CTO helped us get some traction because the web designers were basically just aimless and couldn't agree on a direction. They were trying to be
Is this to
quasi
build a,
a
a
web
web version,
product.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah, right. Your cloud
yeah.
product. Yeah.
They wanted to greenfield the whole thing, and
Oh, of
so
course.
you know,
Rewrite.
yep, rewrite. Which I mean, you're dealing with a COBOL platform. Rewrite is very attractive. Nobody wants to try to do something that's hitched to a COBOL platform because
So
it
what
seems
did you do
insane.
there that,
We hitched ourselves to a COBOL platform,
okay, right.
right?
Yeah.
So
You
yeah,
transitioned
yeah, we did.
practically. Yes. Yeah.
And
So the
uh,
back end was this big old system and the
yep,
front end was a newer
big
kind
bowl
of
of
system.
spaghetti.
Yeah.
That you
Yeah.
think like there's no MVC, there's no framework or anything like that. It was just completely all mishmashed. The UI. In fact, the old green screen UI was still in the code,
I
which is
bet.
crazy to me. But
Yeah.
the one thing we had going for us was we'd been migrating customers up to AWS, and one of the
Like
big
a
pieces
hosted
of that,
version
like a
of
hosted
the old
version
stuff. Yeah.
of our, and so we deployed over remote desktop, and like we had ways to kind of deploy it and make it look like it was a SaaS application. We treated it so we flipped the business model in 18 to a SaaS application.
Oh, you started charging monthly, yearly
Yeah, we did
for it.
started
Yes.
doing yearly subscription instead of doing on perpetual license with a hosted fee. And I'll talk about that in a second. But we were trying to find these ways to do that. And so as we replatformed, the whole thing that allowed us to replatform is the fact that we had the data. Everybody was on a SQL Server database, so it was open. We could hit it with web
Yeah.
ORM tools, and
Yeah.
that exposed. We were able to write an API. And the first thing we did was build a mobile application. We didn't build
Yeah.
a web app first. And that was, in ASU when I went through, I had written a whole master's project was on technology transformation. And my recommendation was for RTA to build a mobile app. And I wrote that paper with 4 of my teammates in 2013. It just took me 7 years or I guess 5 years
Yeah.
to,
Yeah.
get going and get it implemented.
And so the business, I mean, I'm sure it was bumpy. New CEO, do you kind of making some changes pretty
Yep.
quickly, trying to do new things on an old code base, and I don't know, did the team jump up and say, "We'll do exactly what you want, and we're with you in this new." Did they change spots?
I had quite a few of the team that was like, kind of on board or somewhat on board. Nobody quit, I guess. There was a
Mhm.
handful of people. I had one of my best sales reps quit because
Mm,
she quit like a month after I got promoted
mm.
to CEO. She did not want to work for me, which I don't blame her because I didn't really like her very much. But um, no, I'd say, like it was an interesting transition. Again, I kind of mentioned everybody was like, oh, your dad wouldn't have done it that way. And so there was a
Yeah,
lot of that for a long time.
yeah.
But we had to kind of go through and figure out who we were and figure out our cultural identity and the
Right.
type of characters that we were looking for and hiring for.
How
And
long did
so
it take before you kind of settle? I mean, you're still in a transition, but you kind of settled in to a zone of this is our strategy, this is our culture, this is who we hire, this is how we operate.
that piece of it, we probably didn't figure out until 2020, 2021.
Yeah, okay.
I'd say
Few
we
years.
were still making mistakes up until then. But
Yeah.
after that, like we got really clear. But even before then, in 2018, so I'll go back, to this pivotal year for us. That's when we decided we were going to flip to the SaaS model.
Mhm.
I also decided at the same time I didn't like the architecture in the building, really just a paint scheme, and we
Yeah.
needed more space, so we expanded and doubled our rent to the units next door,
Mhm.
and we did a whole TI project as part of that. So we had
Yeah.
a nice little capital outlay as we, basically
Mhm.
rebuilt the building, repainted it. Like it was all like mauve and pinks. It looked like a lawyer's
Yeah.
office, dark wood, and so we,
Yeah. Old
you know,
school.
yeah, so we rebranded, and now it looks like modern Google, Facebook offices, whatever.
Yeah.
And we did that. And at the same time, we were expanding the team. So we hired web devs and we were hiring, the CTO or whatever. So
And you're
like
still
what
bootstrapped, so you're
still totally
growing enough
bootstrap.
to support new team. Yeah.
Yeah. And we're using basically the cash reserves that I've been building up over 15 and 16. But I didn't model it out very well. I didn't have great, finance leaders or anything like that. And what ended up happening is I almost bankrupted the company by the end of 18.
Mm.
And so that was one of like the big learning moments for me is here I just bought this company, and then over 18 months, all these decisions I was making, and they were all good decisions. They were all decisions that needed to be made, but they didn't need to be made right after the other. So I probably went a little bit too fast on that
Mm.
front. But it was a really great wake up call for me that hey, like you got to pay attention to this stuff and think about these things, like not just this year, but thinking about their impact, for the next 3 or 4 years. And I
So
might
some
have
of
gotten
your
in trouble with
investments
that.
didn't pay off so quickly, or you didn't have clear line of sight to your
I
financials?
didn't know how much it was going to cost. Yeah.
Ah,
And how quickly we burned through the cash and then how long it would take for us to start getting payback on it.
right.
They were great investments. And that was probably my problem is I was thinking too long term. I was thinking 3 to 4 years out and
Yeah,
not how do I get through the next 6 months?
yeah.
So those are definitely things I think about. One of the critical moments that we went through.
Well, you're a $15 million ARR run rate company, and back then it was a 1 or 2, and it started to transition. Was there kind of every year you grew 30% or
Oh
whatever it
no,
was, or
no, we
no? Okay.
were growing maybe 10, maybe 12% year over
Yeah,
year, and just kind of middling, and
yeah,
making some bad decisions. Like the dysfunction didn't just go away because I took over.
yeah.
And you asked me about like the transition. I really had to root that out in our team, right?
Ah,
And really set the standard of what it is we're looking for, how we behave, what we're trying to do, and get clear about the vision. And so I had gone through, I'd say we 19, yeah, 2019 is probably when we started getting clear. But by 2021 is when it finally all came into focus, right? It was like the image was kind of getting there, and then all of a sudden it gelled. And we got really clear about our core values, about our purpose, about our mission, and what we were trying to achieve. And I remember I've been talking about it for probably 2, 3 years at this point. So I was going slow. But we had exited several people, like that financial crisis that I put ourselves into, it actually forced us to make some hard decisions that we should have made 2 years prior. But then I got up in front of everybody. This is 2021. We just got back from COVID and basically said, okay, guys, like, what the standard is. We've been talking about humble, hungry, and smart. Where I'm trying to go. And this is where the train's headed. And it's okay if this isn't your train. There's literally another train coming right behind me. It's 5 minutes back, but you can't straddle the platform, right? You either got to be in the train or off the train, but you can't straddle it anymore.
hmm,
So I basically got in front of everybody. I printed off live checks for every single individual worth 10% of their annual salary and handed them out and says, if you don't want to be here on Monday, I totally get it. This is your opportunity to get out, right? Like I will pay you 5 weeks of your, 10% of your annual salary to quit right now. Think about it over the weekend, right? I did this on a Friday. Come back to me on Monday and tell me, if you want to take the check or if you want to stay. And if you're going to stay, like tell me why you want to stay. And we had maybe 35 employees. So like when dad died, we had 25 employees. So by this point, like we'd grown a little bit, but I want to say we're about 35 employees. Payroll, I think I had, it was almost about 4 million at the time. And I was totally expecting like there could be where it's just Josh walking in on Monday and doing all the things, answering the phones, doing support, hiring. And I'm just like, I will rebuild the team if I have to. But I was so clear and so committed that these were the values. And I knew I had people on the team that didn't fit the test. They didn't fit the mold.
yes. Uh-huh.
And I was tired of the dysfunction. I was tired of the infighting and the backstabbing and the like, I'm going to say it to your face that I agree with what you're saying, but I'm going to do something totally opposite, right? I'm going to be an anchor on the boat. And I was tired of it. So I got up
Yeah.
in front of everybody and basically said, look, if you don't want to be here, it's okay. And gave him permission to quit and then paid him to do it. I had one guy on Monday take the check out of
One guy.
35. Now, there was probably 3 or 4 that should have taken the check. But what it did for me is it gave me permission to hold everybody accountable and to
Yes.
say to everybody, look, this is a standard. And if you're totally bought in now, you literally passed up and gave up your own money so that you could be held accountable to the standard. And you agreed, like signed on it with your check. And so from there, it was off to the races. And we started having kind conversations. We call them the kind, candid, radical candor or whatever.
Yeah.
We started having kind, clear conversations and moving people out based on core values, on behaviors, not on their job and how good they were at their job, but on behaviors. And I think that was a big distinction for us, a big moment. So,
How did you get so clear? I mean, we hear stories of new CEOs taking over, and that first meeting, they say, here's how it's going to be. And if you don't like it, there's the door. And, it took you years of, learning and testing and trying and feeling confident and feeling unconfident to get there. How did you get clear about hungry, humble, and smart? And when you say mission, values, and your purpose, that's not like, vague things on the wall. It's very specific. I know your definitions of it. Uh, how did you get clear about all that?
I mean, it was definitely a lot of iteration. It's like building software. And so we
Yeah.
had a couple, I worked with Dave Ramsey, EntreLeadership. They helped me craft like a mission statement and get clear with some initial core values. I worked with a really great team over at Elite Entrepreneurs, a guy named
Yeah.
Brett Gilliland, who had
Yes.
spun out of Infusionsoft, and so he
Right.
helped really, help us with that. I read a lot, and so one of
Yes.
my
I know you
biggest
do.
inspirations was I had listened to a guy named Patrick Lencioni
Yes.
at one of these summits, and he got up and talked about the ideal team player. And as he's sitting there talking about this stuff, I was like, wow, this is exactly what I've been missing. And so reading, ideal team player, I actually got out of that session, went back to, because it was a virtual session, I went back to my dad's bookshelf, and sitting on the bookshelf is this book, Five Dysfunctions of a Team from Patrick Lencioni. And I was like, that's weird. I wonder why he never talked about this. So I read it, and it's a phenomenal book.
Yeah.
And Lencioni writes in a way too. He does a blend of nonfiction. So he uses a fable or a parable to teach you a business principle. So they're very easy, digestible reads. And then he teaches you the model at the end. And I gobbled it up. So I read this book, and I was not a fan of business books at the time, but I read this book and I was like, this is amazing. We're building my company around this. And so that was like the first step. And then it's just iterating over time, right? So working with Dave
Okay.
Ramsey, working with Brett Gilliland, and we ended up adopting the Collins Porras model, which is
Yeah.
from Built to Last,
Yeah.
for purpose, vision, or purpose, values, and mission, and that
Yeah.
makes your vision. We
Yeah.
adopted the Elite model for leadership, which is a leader's got 3 responsibilities: build the team, set the vision, deliver results, and you got to do those 3 things. And you can't deliver results without doing the first 2. And so it was just iterating over and over again. The executive team helped me shape what it meant to be humble, hungry, and smart. We didn't just take Lencioni's
Mhm.
virtues and lift them directly. We made it personal to who we were.
Yeah.
And then we put that into our hiring practices. We put it into our interviews. We put it into our performance reviews. And we just kept iterating on that.
So
Even
what
Dan
would you
Martell,
Yeah. Yeah.
like we
Even
went
Dan,
through
yeah.
an exercise with him, and he talked about this high octane team builder. And so he gave us this model. He called it the golden handcuff quadrant. And we basically rate them on performance and value fit, right? How well do they do work that impresses you? Scale of 0 to 10. And then how, in our case, like how much do they bleed RTA blue and really buy into the culture, and are they a values fit? And if they're not a values fit, but they're a top performer, like those people are toxic and you got to get rid of them.
Yeah.
And people
Yeah.
that are like not doing great work, but they're total values fit, well, you got to lift them up or move them on. They're in the wrong seat, or maybe they're on the wrong bus. So
Right.
you got to lift them up or move them out. But those people on the top right, who are total values fits and great employees, you want to love them, right? And keep them just totally locked up. And so again, iteration, we just got clearer and clearer and clearer about what the standard was at RTA, and then reinforced it, with our systems.
Right. And so what is your mission? If I asked the members on your team, your receptionist or your support person, what would they say?
They would tell you that the current mission is become the dominant leader in the in the public sector fleet management software space, with 30 million in ARR, an NPS of over 75, and $1 billion saved for our clients.
That's not very fluffy. That's not, and
It's
that's
not
pretty
fluffy at all.
measurable. That's
It's very measurable. It's
pretty
very
much a
OKR
quest.
driven. Yeah.
And in that definition, it is the specific quest. What is the hill that we are climbing right now? And there's another hill on top of that, but
Yep.
what is the hill? And it's got to be attractive to growth equity investors when they ask everybody in the company, "What is the hill?"
And everybody
You know,
knows this is where we're
yes,
going. Yeah. This is
yes,
where the
right.
train's headed.
That's great. Well,
Yeah.
what else can you say about the journey between, a few million and, over 10 million in the last few years? I'd like to talk about the growth equity investment as well.
Yeah. So, a big piece of it has been that, I would say the major focus of my career has been replatforming. It takes twice as long as you think it will. It's going to be,
Yeah.
4 times as expensive as you think it will be.
Yeah.
And those are the kinds of things that just, they don't teach you about in business school. They don't teach you that as you're going through this transformation process. So,
So what can
um,
you say about going from your old legacy software to some form of the whatever the Frankenstein version of the modern, thing? It's not just a new start over here and everybody jumps on one day, that kind of thing. What has been your method generally?
so for us, I kind of mentioned the shared SQL Server database. And so we've actually been doing a hybrid approach the entire time. And
Eh,
that's been working really well for us because it gives customers a really smooth transition. Now,
Can they go back to the old
oh yeah, they
way
can.
if they
Yeah.
need to?
So
Okay, yeah.
until you
Mhm.
have feature parity, that's probably the biggest obstacle to getting customers moved over, right?
Yeah,
Is that you haven't moved enough of the cheese into the new platform.
yeah,
And so there's no reason for them to switch. And so we did this as a way to kind of get feedback quickly because this is the other piece is I did not want to build it in a vacuum, which is what Greenfield does, right? You build a
Yes, yes,
Greenfield
yes. And
product.
then you show up. I've been there.
Yep. Yeah. And then all of a sudden, big bang. And then, oh crap, we're totally on the wrong sector, right? Like we're not even on the map anymore. We built the wrong thing for the wrong people. And so for me, I wanted to make sure that we were putting something out, shipping and making it live. Like that's a super high standard for engineers to, live under, is that it's got to work well enough that it can be live. That probably makes us go slower, rather than doing a total greenfield project. But we wanted something that worked side by side with the existing product. Now, what does that mean though? Is it means that all the compromises, that they had to do in COBOL and all the little techniques or whatever, because it's an old school platform. Well, we get to reproduce those inside of,
Yeah.
the new platform Fleet 360, which means if there's a bug in the old platform, we're reproducing a bug in the new platform.
So are you doing two of everything now?
We are not, because we stopped updating the old platform.
I see.
Right. And so like that one's just in maintenance mode. And honestly, we need it to be in maintenance mode because otherwise we'd
Mhm.
be chasing a moving target.
I get it.
And
Yeah.
so it kind of goes into maintenance mode and it's not moving. And then we're building out feature parity on the other thing while also adding in nice to haves, little new features, new things that we couldn't do before. Um, the things that the platform allows us to do, like AKA have a
On the
mobile
dream
app.
list. Holy
Yeah.
cow. Yeah.
And scratch some of those itches. It's like, man, it'd be really nice if we could do something like this. It's all API driven, so the integrations are way nicer and cleaner and more automated. And so we're
Yeah.
building a lot of those and also kind of reworking workflows at the same time.
Yeah.
Um, so that's been a really nice part of the transition. But the hard part has been just, focusing on stability. And then, you have this old legacy platform and an old code base that literally my dad had code in there from 1982.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you're going through there and trying to figure out exactly how this process worked and duplicating the business logic. And it's all a big bowl of spaghetti. So it's hard to follow the thread sometimes.
Wow.
So
Well, you've also grown the business up over 10 million revenue, headed towards 20. What is your general go-to-market motion here? Is it sales led, knocking on doors, outbounding to these fleet managers, in government, going to trade shows or some other, with a little marketing, overhead and such?
yeah. So, a lot of trade shows, advertising, email
Yeah.
campaigns still work. But honestly,
Okay.
the biggest thing that sells in this industry is word of mouth. And so just really trying to deliver a killer product and a killer customer service experience. That's how you win.
Yeah.
We've recently been going after the RFPs. And so that's not an area historically that we've been doing
Yeah.
well in.
Yeah.
RFPs are gross. Nobody likes doing
Government
them,
RFPs. Yeah.
especially government RFPs. But they're effective. And,
Yeah.
when you win a statewide contract, I mentioned, that we're winning several states now. That allows us to use those RFPs for other public agencies within the state. And so, if let's say City of Redmond, California wants to buy a system and the state of California has already purchased one, well, they can just purchase off of that contract. They don't have to go to RFP themselves. And so it makes that
Oh,
a really nice, easy kind of go to market motion where it's, a little bit more sales led.
you make it sound so easy here.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I know it's been
Yeah.
tough
It's
through the years,
taken years to figure that
slogging through
process out.
this and changing out team members and all of that. How many salespeople these days?
We've got 3 AEs, 2 SDRs, and 2 people that are just focused on RFP response.
Okay. Yeah, pretty small team here, and you're growing steady. And of course, this kind of fleet management software, people don't leave it once they've installed it. So I know there's competitors coming after you, but the reason you still exist with the old platform is that people just don't want to change that
Yeah.
slowly, and they don't
Well,
even
and that
want to
was
change to your new system. Yeah.
that's a big reason why we picked government as our focus point is because,
Yeah.
we looked at the cohort analysis and trucking, we were probably churning them every 5 years, right? It was about a
Wow.
20% logo retention rate. But we looked at government and there was a 95%, 96% logo retention rate, which you do the math on that means you're churning them about every 19 and a half years, which
Yeah.
is phenomenal retention.
Yeah.
So it's pretty easy, especially when the ACVs are comparable. That's a pretty easy no-brainer decision. Now, it does mean the sales cycles are painfully long, right?
Yeah.
Anywhere from 12 to 24 months if you're lucky.
Yeah.
You might get one that's super short, less than 6 months, but it's tough. Versus like an enterprise or a trucking, they'll buy it tomorrow if you're right and you're hitting the right pain point. So
Right. So you're moving a company and a code base forward here in this slow moving, industry, and still succeeding. You raised a little debt a couple times along the way here to go a little faster, I guess.
yeah, so we had a traditional line of credit from the bank. They ended up pulling the line because one year we decided to invest our reserves, invest our profits, and so our P&L didn't look good the year we needed to renew. Again, weak financial leadership kind of led to that decision, but I also feel like if you're an entrepreneur, you should be able to spend money that's in your account. And they didn't see it that way. So they pulled the line, and that forced us into the market, which I'm really glad it did because we ended up partnering with a company called Recurring Capital, and they helped us. They got us a nice
Yep.
facility, that we were able to draw on, and we used that to, go out and basically accelerate. Super amazing terms. It was like interest only for a good period of time, which for us was amazing and allowed us to keep hiring and keep growing the team and spend. And honestly, like we invested in the go to market motion quite a bit to help fuel the ship. So,
So, and how much was that? Was that like a couple million or
oh yeah,
something?
it
Or
was. I want to say it was a 4 million total facility, and I think we
okay,
drew 2 of that. And part of that was
okay.
to recap the debt, the founder debt that from the seller
Oh, right.
financing, and so
Okay,
I used
right.
part
You're
of it for that.
rolling and
And then
rolling here.
yeah,
So, was this wasn't very profitable? You're investing to get over this hump here, and I guess still investing here.
yeah.
So, yeah, you just kind of managed the squeeze there with your own pace, and this transformation. Would you say you're mostly over the development investment hump to get to the new code base, or
I'd
on
say
the
we're
downhill slide?
close. Yeah,
Yeah.
by the end of the year we should be done. That's the goal. But I've
Oh,
been saying that for 3 years.
yeah.
So
Okay, right. 2 weeks.
Um, but we do know, like, we've got a deadline. We are sunsetting our classic product. That's another thing that we learned. Yeah, we call it
Yeah.
classic, right? Because it's classic. But one thing we learned is that people don't want to get off a ship unless they have to,
Of course.
and so we had to make them decide. We
Yeah.
were giving them a choice which platform they wanted to stay on, and weren't getting a lot of people that wanted to move. Because again, status quo reigns supreme, and it's like bureaucratic inertia, right? Nothing changes unless it has to. So we communicated a sunset date, and all of a sudden, people are migrating over, right? And they're adopting, and they're trying, and they're pushing. So that's been a big piece of
Okay,
the
good.
transition
I'm glad to hear.
migration. So
That last half of the stragglers are the tough ones.
yep,
The early. You have your early adopters in your own base when you have a new thing. A transition planted there.
yep,
All right, let's talk about your growth equity investing. Yes, you've been a member of my Practical Founders peer groups, talking to you all the time. You're getting through your challenges, helping other people through their challenges, weighing opportunities and big decisions and things like that. And
been an amazing group, by the way. If you have an opportunity to join that group, this is my favorite peer group by far. So
no, I really appreciate you saying that. And I've enjoyed watching your journey and helping you where I can. And I know you get a lot of help from your team, and you offer a lot of help for your team. You have been really instrumental in helping people who are not up at 10 million ARR to, go through those very predictable transformations in their own ways
yeah,
as we go through this. But
I actually just
um,
talked to one of those peers this morning about a challenge he's
oh
going
yeah,
through. So it's really nice to
yeah,
build those relationships. So
awesome. You ran a process eventually. You got some there's been investors that have been hanging around like all software companies, and you decided to engage with them. How did you briefly get through a process that allowed you to choose one growth equity partner and start to move forward?
yeah, so we just had conversations, and decided not necessarily what was most important to us, but I had been hearing enough, and I'd seen enough other people go through the horror story of bad investment partners, bad investor relations, and
Yep.
so I was just kind of overly cautious about that. And as I was talking to different firms, there was actually an acquisition opportunity that popped up for us, and it got me started. Like, okay, well, how could I finance that? And so I talked to our debt partner,
Finance your own acquisition of
our own
another company.
acquisition of a
Yeah.
competitor, yeah. And so started talking to our finance partner and realized that wouldn't be tenable. Like, it'd be very expensive to try to do that, as far as the
Yeah.
customer acquisition goes,
Yeah. Yeah.
because those are always risky when you do those. And it made me realize, like, if I wanted to do this, I needed a serious partner that had patient capital. So that is the big difference between debt and equity, right? Debt's not
Yeah.
patient. It is earning interest the day you do it,
It's
and you
not
got to pay it
lenient
back.
either. Yeah.
It's not lenient either, right? You can't miss it and all that. But equity is usually very patient. They know sometimes you're going to miss, sometimes you're going to hit, and they're waiting for the exit. And so you don't have to pay it back until you do have a successful event. And that got me seriously considering equity. Prior to that, I had not at all. I would just continue to raise debt. And I would have been
Right.
waiting too. Like on this one, I was like, "No, this isn't the right deal for us." I could have easily just waited and raised more debt. But again, that they preemptive strike, throw the kind of this
Right.
verbal offer to you, and like, oh man, we got to think about this. But I also knew that there was an opportunity for us to go faster and to grow a little bit quicker. I'm not totally a practical founder, and then one day I don't want to just live off the profits of this thing because there are no
Yeah.
profits. One,
No, no.
we're
Practical
investing,
is a little,
investing,
that a
right?
little investment,
Yeah,
just not crazy.
not crazy, right? And so we
Yeah.
want to go through. But I knew that if I could throw just a little bit more, run it a little bit hotter, like we're just so close to breaking through. I knew we needed more engines, more engineers in the engine
Yeah.
and the development engine. We needed some help on the CSM side, from a customer success standpoint, especially as we're talking about migration.
Yeah.
Because the biggest challenge with any kind of migration isn't even the technical piece, right? It's the psychological piece. It's the business side of the migration. How do you convince all these customers to move over? And so just being
And
able to build those
retune their
relationships.
habits, right? They don't
Exactly.
want to do it, right?
Yeah.
Culturally. Yeah.
So I wanted to invest in that side of the house and in our customer service team. And then we could start talking about investing in the go-to-market motion. And so,
Yeah.
we brought on SGE, and that was part of the play was, hey, you guys are along. They want to help me finish replatforming, which is not typical for growth equity. They usually want to
Correct.
see their money be deployed to go to market so that they can actually start seeing growth right away. But they recognize the investment, is that we go through, finish the product, and that product is already winning in the marketplace, and it's going to continue winning and just get better.
There we
So,
go. How many firms did you talk to when you said, "Okay, I'm kind of interested in this"? Some people, I think Susquehanna and Ben
Mhm.
came out and said, "We're interested," and you said, "Well, that's interesting," and you went around and talked. Did you talk to 5 or 10
oh yeah,
different firms?
over the years, I probably talked to 10, 15. In this
Okay.
last round, when we started getting a little more serious about it, it was probably about 5.
Okay.
So,
And what made you decide to go with Susquehanna and do the type of deal that you do? You have a lot of choice over what kind of deal you do.
yeah. So the big things that stuck out to me, one, I wanted patience. I didn't want to be
Yeah.
on somebody else's timetable.
Right.
You find out they're 3 years into their fund, and that means you've got to basically a 7-year
Yeah.
clock
Clock's
before
ticking.
they
Yeah.
decide to either re up or they got to pay back their LPs. And I didn't want to be on somebody else's clock. I wanted to sell when the time was right. And so I wanted to be clear about that with them. I wanted a partner that wasn't high pressure, that wasn't
Mhm.
going to be all like, no, no, here's your playbook and this is what we want to do. I didn't want to go acquisition. I wanted to invest in the company. And so acquisition would be strategic. It would be based on when it made sense for the company and like, oh no, this is a great
Yeah,
fit for
some
who we
partners
are.
want you to just start buying little scrappy,
Yeah.
crappy things and piling it up. Yeah.
So one of the equity partners that we were looking at, they kept putting companies in front of us. What do you think about this person? What do you think about
You
this
should buy
person?
them. You should buy them. Yeah.
Yeah. And we had been telling them like, no, this is our ICP. This is who we're going after. This is what we're doing. And it was just kind of like totally missing the point because why? Well, that's how they're going to get the M&A hooks in.
Yeah.
So that was one thing. And SGE, they, as I talked to some of the other founders, they rarely push M&A opportunity, right? They push
Yeah.
it when it makes sense. But, if we go 2 or 3 years without doing an M&A deal, they're totally happy with that.
Yeah.
And if they want to wait 20 years before I finally decide to sell, they're happy with that too. And so they're very patient because they invest off their own balance
It's
sheet.
gonna be a very big company at this growth rate, right?
Yeah, that's
Unlike the
right. Yeah.
previous growth rate. Yes.
I don't know
Right.
that I will last 20 years. That's not my timetable.
Well,
Um,
let's talk about that. I mean, when you raise growth equity and you have investors, practical type investors like growth equity, minority investors,
yeah.
you're saying you're putting up big money to get paid back
Yeah.
someday. So someday I'll help pay that back to you by selling a majority of the company or that kind of thing. And, is that in your plan? Presumably you guys
Yeah.
are
No,
aligned
the
on
goal
that.
has always
Yeah.
been to exit.
Okay.
And it just, over time, I mentioned that $2 million deal, back in 2021, we had an offer for 10x that, which is amazing. That
Yeah.
was close to 20 million. And we decided to walk away because I wanted to bet on myself again.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, when this one came around, it was really kind of poetic that it was about the same amount, a little bit over that. But I
Yeah.
still got to retain about 75% of the company, which is just awesome.
Right.
Right.
Can
So,
can you give us a rough estimate? You put up money to buy out the company
mhm,
and finance that, and you just took some money off the table in a minority secondary investment. So the founders get to take some money off the table there. Not all the money went to the business.
right.
What was the return on your, you know,
Just that
that initial
initial,
buyer?
the
Yeah,
initial was probably about 10x. So,
10x. All right, and you have a 75% left that's rolling there.
yeah, and I think
So
that's been an
congratulations.
interesting number, right? Like, when you go from 2.4 to roughly, another 20 million, like we're just 10xing each time. And my
Yes.
goal was, I had a $20 million offer and working with coaches like yourself, Dan Martell, he's like, "Hey,
Uh-huh.
like you're thinking too small." And he
Yeah.
challenged me. And he's like, "Why not 200?"
Yeah.
And I was like, "Oh, why not 200?" And so my ambition changed. And I remember talking to Greg Scoresby about this. He says, every
Yeah.
time that the CEO's ambition changes, great things happen to the business. And
Yes.
so I brought on these investors. And what's interesting is like 200 million is not the answer anymore.
Yeah.
Now, like it's not 10x. I'm not going for 2B, but, we've got our sights set higher.
Yeah.
So the ambitions changed again, which I appreciate. And I don't know, 3 to 5 years, my ambition might change again. Or I might
Yeah.
be saying like, no, I'm done. Now it's time to actually hang this up. So,
Well, it's not crazy. If you keep growing at your growth rate, you're going to hit it.
yeah,
As long as things don't clobber you in the business or it doesn't get stuck because the founder runs out of steam,
yeah,
right? And the team runs out of steam and so forth. Investors will help you not run out of steam there. One things that could clobber businesses in 3 to 5 years probably is a little AI change in the industry, doing these things automatically. How much was AI part of your current product and your current vision for growth equity? We haven't
yeah.
even mentioned the words yet. You're getting off of COBOL and not even into AI,
Yeah,
but
exactly.
like, yeah,
But
what?
I'm thinking about it. And so
Yeah,
it's one of the things that I'm really aware of. Like our competitors aren't talking about this at all.
okay,
But it's something I'm hyper aware of. I actually have an entire engineer, like I've got my VP of innovation. This is his old job responsibility
yeah,
is figuring out how do we leverage AI internally and how do we put AI into the product,
right. But just for founders to hear out there, you didn't have this AI first crazy AI story. Yeah, it's AI possible and AI probable,
Right. But
but
it's still
it's
crud
not
app.
really right now.
Yeah.
It's not happening right now.
Yeah. But we are seeing
Interesting.
a shift.
Okay.
Even in the portfolio, we're seeing a shift where more companies are doing what we're doing, right? Which is because it's coming. How do we
Yeah.
leverage it? How do we make sure we're not blindsided by it? Because if you
Yeah.
read the hype, you listen to people like Satya or you listen to,
Yeah. It's all
Sam
coming.
Altman, right? That the cost of building new software, right, and the moat that we put around our SaaS companies is evaporating. And so
Yeah.
you think that it's going to take forever for a competitor to catch up to what you've done when now that time has been cut in half, maybe even 90%.
Right.
Or there's going to be a day where we don't need SaaS CRUD apps anymore and
Right.
everything's just agentic and,
Yeah.
everybody's interacting with your app through ChatGPT. HubSpot just released a
Yeah.
massive, where you can talk to ChatGPT and it'll interface with your HubSpot data and you can have it do deep research on your HubSpot data,
Right.
bypassing HubSpot. It's, entire user interface, which is
Right.
fascinating to me.
Right.
So, and Dharmesh
Disrupting
he's
themselves. Yeah.
huge on that right now. So,
Yeah. No, I totally see that. There was an article last week in the Wall Street Journal. Morgan Stanley, big financial services company, has 50,000 developers and all this old code. They're using AI to go understand what the old code does, not to rewrite the old code
yeah.
and bring it forward, but it's superpowering the people who are doing the transition there. So maybe there's one of the things in there where it's basically describing the spaghetti code
Yeah.
business rules in English that you can move a little faster to the other side. Because it'll take a year for somebody to go decipher
Well,
what's
and it's
what's
fascinating about
really
that
in.
is they can feed that input, right? So they can use AI to discover that, and then they can take that and feed that back into AI and have it build the new code, right? And
Okay,
do
yes, right,
do the
yes.
replatforming.
Yeah.
So it's fascinating.
Yeah. Well, that's really exciting, but, it wasn't part of the deal so far and all of
Mm-mm.
that. So
No.
how are you feeling about this growth equity investment? Pressure, maybe some misalignments, right? Somebody else in the building. You're a great one for getting a lot of help, and you're
Yeah.
very open about it, so that makes you very amenable to getting great help from, investors and board members and their teams that can help you. But, how are you feeling about the, growth equity investment a couple months after?
Yeah. It's been going really good so far. I would say it's like any marriage. That honeymoon phase is a lot of fun, and then like you start figuring out how to cohabitate and live
Yeah.
together as you're focused on now. Okay, how do we solve this problem together?
Yeah.
So we're going through that as we learn, each other's working styles and how each other think. But I think that's been one of the nice things is just how open they are to like the way I think about things. And because of how open I am to, okay, well, give me some advice here and how would you handle this situation?
Are
Um,
you leveraging their value creation team, their operations teams? They have people probably that specialize helping their portfolio companies with pricing
yep.
and,
Pricing, go to
go to
market,
market, everything. Yes, right.
engineering, stability. Like, yeah, they've got a lot of people that can help us with that recruiting.
Is that
Um,
started yet?
yeah, it started. I'd say it's too soon to see the fruit, but it's
Yeah, of
definitely
course.
started.
Yeah.
So,
No, it's they gotta kinda map out what are the priorities and where to help and, start that, but that's
yeah.
part of the resourcing.
And
How's
that's
your
something else for
executive
founders
team?
too.
Oh,
Greg,
go
is
ahead.
that a lot of investment firms will charge you for those, right? If you want to use their value creation team,
Oh,
then you need to, pay a management fee for those, right? Or it comes
oh,
out of your equity, or there's a cut,
I
right?
didn't know some actually did that. That's
Yeah, SGE does
kind of
not. So
sinful.
it's a little bit,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Especially it's just kind of like, wait a minute, you guys just made this investment, and so in their mind, it's a way to like further and secure their investment. However, other companies, there's cost to that, and so they're
Yeah.
not getting paid for that equity, and so they
Yeah.
charge the company for it.
So, Josh, did something change in how you are as a CEO and your values, purpose, and mission that's on the wall and your leadership team? I'm sure it's going to evolve here, but did you have to adapt any of that to raise some
Probably
funding or?
not to raise funding, but to like after the investment, we definitely had to, like we made an adjustment. We're bringing on a VP of finance
Okay.
to kind of come in and oversee the controller who was
Not
our finance
surprising,
head,
right? Be
right?
tight. Yeah.
Yep. But yeah, no, the rest of it has just been all right. Let's grow. Let's mature. We've got a partner in now who is kind of holding us accountable. We can't just fire from the hip and do what founders love to do, which is yeah, that sounds good, right? We use our intuition for a lot of things. Now we have to kind of justify our decisions with data, with numbers, and so those are the things that are
You have to
taking
find
a
some
little
numbers
bit.
for your intuition now.
Yeah, just to justify why did I decide to do that. Um,
Yeah.
so that's been an adjustment, but I think it's one of those just maturity things, right? It's been an adjustment because it's just us growing up and maturing a
Yeah,
little bit.
good for you. Yeah, and you chose to, let's say, act more adult-like, in your business, but, not have to just take some silly playbooks and listen to finance guys tell you exactly how to run the business and so
Right.
forth. So there's
And we
it's
can
a
push back because
maturing
I still
process.
have, right, like I've still got two hands firmly on the wheel. They're just in the passenger seat and they've got their minority rights with their hand on the steering wheel. They can jiggle it a little bit.
I get it.
But yeah, if there's something I feel strongly about, then we do it. So
Did your personal life change here? I know you've been managing this business and you have a large family and, have let's say, a certain lifestyle of which you're accustomed to with, did
nothing
that,
much,
okay.
and this is probably just more a function of timing than anything, and just going through it. Like we're just recovering from some surgery and medical stuff. And that actually seems to be the theme for this year is just medical. Um, which thank goodness
Yeah.
for insurance. But no, I'd say, if we're going to do anything, you probably see some more travel, some things like that. But
Well,
um,
you travel quite a bit. I mean, we'll just let people know here, you got 8 kids and
yep.
you truck them off to Hawaii and, you get in your off-road vehicles and do adventure travel and that's part of what you guys have done along the way, right? And
Yeah.
didn't sacrifice that as you built this company.
Yeah, and that was something I learned from Michael Wutz. Yeah, Michael Wutz. He had a book
Yeah.
called Profit First, right? And it was basically
Yes.
like if you put the profit
Calowitz.
first,
Yes.
yeah, and so you got to enjoy enjoy the journey, so to speak. And if
Yes.
you just keep waiting and waiting and you keep dumping the profit into your business, well, your business is a cash eating machine, and it will always take more money. And so, a few
And
years ago,
time.
I adopted that mindset. Was like, all right, I'm going to make sure that I'm taking care of, and kind of balancing between how much do I want to feed the business so we invest and grow, but then also, how do I make sure that I don't lose my mind in the process and lose my family in the process, right? Like, how
Yeah.
do I build that? And so,
Yeah.
that's been a good mindset shift for us. So we did that. Like when we did the debt, I mentioned that we recapped and took care of the founder debt, but we also took a small distribution, and that
Yeah.
helped. As we did the vacations because it's like pent up demand. It'd been so long since we've been able to go out as a family. So
Yeah. Well, that's great. So, yeah, and now you're in another phase. So I don't know, phase 3 or 4,
yeah,
maybe phase 10 for the whole business, looking way back. But in your tenure, right, you've evolved as a CEO. I've seen you grow before my eyes, and now you're helping so many other CEOs, and you got a lot of help to do that. And so I appreciate that you ask for help and you say, I'm not good at this, and you keep trying things, and you still got your hands on the wheel and you're doing it at your own pace, which is another way to control all the pressures, that are out there. And you're doing this in a business, in a market that moves at a certain pace. You actually can't make it move much faster.
yeah.
So
It's
awesome.
definitely been it's been a challenge, but it's been a lot of fun. And I'm
Yeah.
thankful that I've had a lot of mentors along the way that have made it worth it. So it's been good.
Awesome. Well, Josh, this is the point where I ask what advice you give most often to savvy founders. You were the guy asking for advice, 10 years ago, 5 years ago. And now people are sitting at your feet saying, how did you do that? That's amazing. What advice do you give most often to practical founders out there who aren't, starting off with an assumption that it's all about the funding?
I would say for me personally, every problem's a leadership problem. And
Mm,
so when I think about the biggest challenge that you have building a SaaS business is always the people,
yeah.
and just making sure that you get the right people on the bus on the
Yep.
right seats. And most problems that I ever see is because we got the wrong person in the wrong seat, and they're on the wrong bus. And you can't outrun that. No matter how good the
Mm,
product is, no matter how good your financial model is, whatever, it will always catch up to you at some point.
mm,
And that causes more problems than anything. When you can get a leadership team that's 100% aligned with one another, it doesn't matter what the market's doing. It doesn't matter what the product is doing. Like, it will figure itself out. It will force you. It's a forcing function,
mm.
to get that alignment. And then you go through and like, you just can't be stopped at that point. But if there's a problem in the business, it's guaranteed it's because there's been a failure of leadership somewhere, and all failures of leadership end up being your problem.
CEO.
You, the CEO, yeah,
Yeah.
and it's up to you to make sure that it doesn't happen, and that's from top to bottom. Doesn't matter how many direct reports you have or how many, like we're at 90 people now. There's no way I'm managing 90 people,
Yeah.
um, but it all starts with you. So in the tone, and it's I have so many isms that I throw out. Right, it's not about what you preach; it's about what you tolerate.
Yeah.
There's no bad teams. There's only bad leaders. Right, those are two of my favorites from Jocko Willink.
Yeah.
But every leadership or every problem ends up being a leadership problem in some form or fashion. And your inability to, and Lencioni speak, to create clarity, over communicate clarity, and reinforce that clarity. If you can't do that, it doesn't matter. It won't matter how awesome your idea is if you can't get other people on board. So you got to get alignment
Right. And then eventually keep the main thing. That's your
always.
main thing, right?
Yep.
So, great. Josh, I really appreciate you sharing your story. It's an amazing and improbable story, actually, and, I have a lot of respect for what you've done to build yourself and your company and your market and your team, through all of this. It's really exciting. This is the exciting part of the game, is change the world
Totally.
with people you enjoy doing it with.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And I'm the third generation, so I was supposed to destroy it. And that
Oh,
just hasn't
right,
happened. So it's been awesome.
right. What is it? Long sleeves to short sleeves to short sleeves to no sleeves,
Yeah,
and that kind
essentially.
of thing,
Right.
something like that? To
Yeah.
Hawaiian shirts, I don't know, that kind of
Right.
thing. So that's awesome. Well done, and, what an opportunity for you as well. Didn't look like an opportunity, but it totally is.
Yeah.
Thanks for being on the Practical Founders podcast, and thanks for your membership and support and, all your generosity in the Practical Founders peer groups. I love working with you, and I'm glad to see you succeed.
Absolutely. It's been a blast. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for watching this week's interview on the Practical Founders podcast. Be sure to like this episode and subscribe to the Practical Founders YouTube channel to keep up with my weekly in-depth interviews with serious software founders who are building valuable software companies without big funding. You can check out my blog, all the podcast episodes, and information about my Practical Founders CEO peer groups at practicalfounders.com, or message me on LinkedIn if you'd like to connect. See you next week.